Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Susan Deacon. I'm one of the university's assistant principals, and it is my very great honour, on behalf of the principal, Professor Sir Timothy O'Shea, to welcome you to the 2015 Mountbatten Lecture, and in particular, to welcome our speaker, Captain Eric Winkle Brown. More of him in just a moment. But first, a word about this lecture. The Mountbatten Lecture has a very rich and textured history. It was first delivered by Lord Mountbatten himself back in 1962. Since then, the speakers who have graced this platform include some of the nation's foremost military and political leaders, academics and journalists. The University of Edinburgh is very proud to host this event and to do so in association with the Joint Military Education Committee. And our thanks go to Mr. Bryden Ritchie, convener, and all his colleagues, both for their support for this lecture and also for the excellent work that they do throughout the year with the city's 4 universities. So, to tonight's speaker. Eric Brown was born in Leith in 1919. He was educated at Edinburgh's Royal High School and then here at this university, where he studied modern languages. His interest in flying goes back to childhood. He first flew quite literally on his father's knee. He went on to become not just a pilot, but to be widely regarded as Britain's greatest ever pilot. He is the Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm's most decorated pilot of all time. He has flown 487 different types of aircraft, more than anyone else in history, and has performed 2,407 flight deck landings, another world record, which he has held for more than 65 years. In his quite remarkable life, he has seen and done things most of us can barely imagine. He attended the 1936 Berlin Olympics and witnessed the Nuremberg Rally. During World War II, he was arrested by the SS and was one of only 2 men to survive his ship being torpedoed. He was at the liberation of the Belsen concentration camp and, a fluent German speaker, interviewed some of the most notorious Nazi leaders, including Himmler and Göring. He has written several books, numerous articles. Among his many honours, he holds an MBE, an OBE, and a CBE, and was awarded an honorary degree from the University of Edinburgh in 2008. He is, without question, a truly remarkable and inspirational man, and it is our very, very great privilege to welcome him back to his home city here tonight. So to speak to us on the topic, Britain's defence in the near future, please join with me in welcoming Captain Eric Winkle Brown. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, what an honour it is for me to be back in my old alma mater. And I would love, firstly, to thank you, Professor Deacon, for your kind words. It is lovely if somebody's pinched my nose. That doesn't help. The professor.
You didn't really need them.
It was always like this at the university. Anyway, here we are, back in job. Now, if you look at the title, you'll see the rather vague words, in the near future. Now, what do we mean by the near future? Well, I'm taking as my target time 2020. And there's a lot suddenly going on in the world at the moment, which is making us all think ahead. And that would certainly not be too far ahead. However, let me start by making an obvious statement. the fundamental justification for any nation to require a defense capability is to counter a threat to national security. So let us look at that aspect first and foremost. Since World War II, I'll put up a shot for you. There's a map of the world, and it's meant to illustrate to you the hot spots for us. So since World War II, the only threat to the UK from a major power bloc has come from the Soviet Union. With the Cold War, which lasted from 1945, 1945, right up to the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. However, since then, a new type of major threat has taken shape, namely what we call broadly terrorism. Now, this emanates mainly from the Middle and the Far East, but it has a cultural root reminiscent of the medieval Crusades, and it now poses a sinister technological threat. Think of the attack on the Twin Towers in America. This is a huge step forward from medieval times. Now, since 1942, the UK has not, with the exception of the Falklands, taken any unilateral action involving her in armed conflict. But it has supported the USA in wars in Korea, Iraq, and Afghanistan, all of which have been strategic failures. Support for NATO in Sierra Leone, Bosnia, and Libya gave more positive results. There you can see the Falklands, which certainly was not a strategic failure. I'm moving on now. Just when that threat, the one of, I suppose you would call it jihadism, seems to point to our support for NATO and our best bet. There pops up a new situation, the categorization of the threat, with the Russian bloodless annexation of Crimea. Now, this happened very much in our lifetime last year. With this act, Russia has made it patently clear it disfavors further encroachment by Western Europe into its former empire. This has given rise to an interesting view by the American Heritage Foundation that there are two Russian armies, one built around heavy conventional forces, the other designed for mobility and cooperation with local forces, as was used in Crimea and as we see it today being used in the eastern part of the Ukraine. In the light of the foregoing, what defense requirements will we need in our own European backyard? First and foremost, of course, manpower. This has already been seriously reduced by the political cuts imposed on all three services. These have been made not only because of financial restrictions, but because in the context of modern political thinking, the UK will never get involved in a solo capacity in any major conflict outside Europe. It may, however, have to deal alone with British colonial unrest or natural disasters in a wider spectrum. There you see what I was referring to, the cuts in the forces and our involvement over a period of many years there. Now, at the present stage in military history, the most powerful striking force in the world is, and I use is because force is singular, I haven't forgotten my syntax, is the 11 nuclear aircraft carriers in the United States Navy. Make no mistake about this. They can cover the entire globe with an awesome array of weapons and aircraft. Now, we in the UK cannot, of course, compete with this 11 nuclear carriers, but we have hoisted in the lesson and taken the first steps towards achieving similarity on a reduced scale by building 2 super aircraft carriers with non-nuclear propulsion. There are advantages in that. So, as I see it, here is the nub of my strategy. We want a new carrier task force, which would form the hub of the British defence system and comprise a main strike carrier, a helicopter assault carrier, escorts, and logistic supply ships. And of course, be manned by all three services. The force would be mobile, self-sufficient, and uni-service. A significant benefit of such a carrier force is its ability to cross-operate with American and French carrier forces, bilaterally with the French and bilaterally, of course, with the Americans, as in the Libyan campaign, where we were with the French in the context of NATO. Worked very successfully there. The equipping of this force will involve heavy commitment to the P-35, I'll go back one, to the P-35 strike aircraft, and will also include 4 types of helicopter. Firstly, the Chinook for troop transport and heavy lift. The Merlin, the 3-engined helicopter for anti-submarine and anti-surface warfare. Apaches for attack, and wildcats, or as I knew it in my younger day, the lynx, for reconnaissance and scout operations. Now, much of the turmoil in today's world is due to the fact that in the last 50 years, the world population has more than doubled. And that a larger proportion of the growth has occurred in the Middle East and in Africa, where leaders in those areas are unable to provide for the basic survival of their people. This can lead to the deprived people taking their own drastic action, such as the piracy that is now occurring of Somalia. It must not be forgotten that the seas comprise 70% of the world's surface. 80% of the world's population lives in or near the coast. And 9% of our commerce sails across the sea and needs to be kept moving if our economic system is not to collapse. So, we're a maritime country, we need a maritime strategy. Now, to preserve this system, crucial global choke points and access to trading countries around the globe must be assured. The hotspots, which are going to perhaps give us trouble, are North Korea, Iran, and Venezuela. The main choke points are the Straits of Hormuz, Straits of Malacca, the South China Sea, the Sea of Japan, the Black Sea, and the Eastern Mediterranean. The grand strategy I have outlined will be financially viable if we do not get involved in major brush wars such as Iraq and Afghanistan, which, according to the Royal United Services Institute, cost the UK at least £29 billion. And for what? The 2003 invasion and occupation of Iraq contributed to the spread of terrorism and led to the deaths of at least 100,000 Iraqis, while making refugees of at least 2 million. Now, these are obvious losses, but in addition, the marginalization of Iraq's Sunni population has led to the rise of our big problem today, ISIS, and some other radical jihadist groups, which are rampant in their crusade against Western culture. This has been emphasized by the British experience in Afghanistan's Helmand, where the Taliban still flourishes and the opium crops continue to expand. The Western world still seems to ignore the power of tribalism, even though it permeates our own territory. Think of Scotland's attempt to gain independence, or the violent history of the Irish Republican Army. Tribalism at its best or its worst. Now, the Carrier Task Force strategy I've outlined is not all-embracing, and that provision will have to be made for a maritime patrol capability, for aerial home defense, for UAVs, or drones as they're known, for naval coverage of strategic outposts such as Antarctica, training facilities, and an army group dedicated to NATO. All of these extras still exist at the moment and will continue to be the subject of strict budget control. But are they justified? Well, let's look at them. A maximum control, a maritime control capability is essential, if for no other reason than that we are a maritime nation. Four aircraft could cover this, in my opinion. It should be able to provide the cover we need if we base two in Scotland, northern Scotland, and two in Cornwall. Aerial home defense is being shown to us at the moment almost daily, provided by RAF Typhoons, based on the East Coast, and is largely to deal with Russian intrusion in UK airspace. But we could face terrorist suicide missions, such as happened in the USA, and for that reason, if for no others, we must still have this aerial home defense. The technological development of unmanned military drones and their operational success in Afghanistan as such has shown that it is inevitable that they must increase in our defense inventory. But they bring fiscal advantages in their relative simplicity of design and operation. It is not my job to get into the ethical side of this. I thoroughly believe that drones must be, and of course, will eventually replace their manned counterparts. The number of UK outposts of strategic importance has diminished until it's a virtual wipeout with the return of Hong Kong to China. But the South Atlantic, with the Falkland Islands and Antarctica, and the region of possible oil deposits there, makes it of significant attraction to justify a permanent guardian presence with a patrol ship. We have always had one there. We should always continue to have that. Training now is the control element of any military organization. And this requires the expensive tools that go with it, such as aircraft, tanks, and simulators. Simulators now, of course, are playing an increasing role in training because they are very cost-effective. Politicians seem to be learning that boots on the ground in far distant corners of the globe are something that voters will no longer support. But the defense of Europe and its cultural treasures is a different matter when you talk to the public. Afghanistan and Germany bring up different thoughts in the minds of the voter. They are prepared to support the cultural treasures of Europe, but they are not quite sure what goes on in the wilds of Afghanistan. So these voters are going to have a very serious voice in the future. And in this latter respect, NATO is our watchdog, and we must be prepared to support it with a trained force and rapid response. An increasingly heavy burden that is falling on military forces is that of humanitarian aid in the event of natural disaster or military operations. Or military oppression of religious or ethnic minorities. This should normally be able to be handled by the carrier task force. Lends itself admirably to this, can carry a large amount of goods, there's huge space aboard, and high mobility to get there fast. So it offers a huge amount, not only in the fighting aspect of the world, but in the welfare part of the world. Now, finally, we come to the crunch question of the nuclear deterrent. This is always going to arouse passion. But the hard facts are the UK must have this ultimate weapon if it is intending to have a meaningful voice in any critical negotiating table or have the ability to control a rogue state such as North Korea. There remains the question of how to maintain such a weapon in a permanent state of readiness and conceal its whereabouts for delivery. Nuclear Trident submarine force has provided a satisfactory answer, but at a price we may not be able to sustain. These are my own views on the thing, let's make it clear. Perhaps we could divide this primary weapon between a reduced Trident force, submarine force, with strategic nuclear weapons being carried on the carrier task force. It is a feasibility, but there would have to be a study to show that it is both practical and cost-effective. But at least it's something that has occurred to me, and I'm sure many of you sitting there have your own ideas on how you would deal with this situation. There are those that don't want anything to do with it. There are those that say, keep it going as it is, but we've got to be realistic. It is costly. As I say, all this, these are my own ideas on how I would run it. The carrier task force is not a new thing. In World War II, the Americans demonstrated in the Far East what a well-organized non-nuclear task force could do. Times have changed, and we have some far more technologically advanced ability. But it would be the same strategy. People have talked a lot about how do you defend an aircraft carrier chugging around the world. Well, I remember being invited onto the first American nuclear carrier, the Enterprise. And I was taken up to the bridge, and the captain said, now I'm going to show you how fast we can go. And I said, well, you've covered up the speedometer or something. He said, yes, and you're not going to be able to look at it either. You can guess. Well, we went along like an MTB for a while. In fact, so fast, you couldn't possibly land on the carrier because the flight deck was angled, pointing up, of course. And so he said, well, you can guess what we're doing, but it was obviously getting up to the region of 40 knots. Next thing I said to him was, how are you being defended? And he said, well, I'll show you something. Come and look at this. He showed me a display which showed right underneath us, going along at the same speed and moving just as we did, a US nuclear submarine. Can you have a better defense? It astonished me to think of a carrier doing something like 40 knots and a submarine down there sticking with it all the way. But I'm telling you this so that you don't go back and say, it's a bit unrealistic to think of a carrier force. How do you defend it? Believe you me, it can be defended. Well and truly so. Now I'm sure you want to ask far more questions than the one I've just tried to answer for you. With me today, I have the best man you could have to answer that, and that is the head of the Fleet Air Arm, Rear Admiral Russ Harding. He is going to field the questions. I will be with him. We'll do it between us. But I think one of the problems, of course, is if you have questions and they're asked from the front, you don't hear them at the back. So we are going, I believe, to have microphones going around and I'm sure there are questions you want to ask. So can we perhaps set about that? Before we do so, I understand amongst the young people here, there are some from my old school, the Royal High. Is that so? Hold up your hands if there are any here from the Royal High. One, that's something anyway. Oh, one or two, yes. Well, wonderful to see you. And take my kindest regards back to the rector when you go. Oh, she's with us. Well done. How nice to see you. Change days, Lady Rector today. In my day, the tours were still in force, and believe you me, we had a pretty brutal rector. But there we go. Times have changed. Right, we're ready for any questions. Russ, would you like to come up here? Sir, do you want to take a seat? Right, I'll sit down there. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. As Captain Brown, sir to me, introduced me, my name's Rear Admiral Russ Harding. I count myself as a friend of Captain Brown's now, from the number of times I've sat in his company and listened to him. And it's an absolute honour and privilege. So you said that yourself at the beginning, but I've said every time I sit and listen to you, I feel I'm in the position of being honoured, being able to listen to what you say. Not so long ago, some of you must have heard him speak on Desert Island Discs with Kirsty Walk. And as my office and its slightly open plan and the whole floor plate were listening, we had a print of his recently painted portrait, which I think is now in one of my air stations at Yeovilton in Somerset. I had him looking down at us as we were listening to him. And it sends a shiver up your spine as you're listening to that, particularly when he came to the end. And Kirsty said, of course, Captain, you get, as I recall, sir, you get the Bible. She said, you get the works of Shakespeare. And what else would you take? What other book or publication would you take? And he said, Kirsty, I'm going to take my logbooks and I'm going to live every single hour and every single flight of my career. And I think that was almost the last thing you put in that interview. And it was just wonderful at the time. As I said, he asked me, I think over a year ago, if I would come here as a friend and head of the Fleet Air Arm in two different guises to help him with this lecture. One of the things he said was that if he couldn't come because he had the cold or the flu or he twisted his ankle, would I come and do it? And I said, hell will freeze over before we get to the stage where he couldn't come and do that, and I'm glad to be able to do that. But I said I would come and help host some of the questions on the Q&A session. The other thing, nakedly and unashamedly, of course, is that one of this nation's huge successes sits not many miles from this room, which Captain Brown very kindly teed into, which is the two supercarriers that this country is building over in Rosyth. 68,000 tonnes, 70,000 tonnes. This nation is building two supercarriers in a shipyard, in a dockyard that has never built a ship in the past, will probably never build a ship again. Certainly we won't be building aircraft carriers in the next 30 to 50 years. We pigeonhole them as saying they'll be around for 50 or 60 years. And yet, this nation doesn't applaud that whole thing, and he has signposted this in the way. Much like the Olympics, although the NEO and other things would like to criticise the carrier programme, much like the Olympics, there is something sitting over there that's being put together very, very quickly. It's been put together all around the UK in blocks, and then, as I call it, we zip the carriers together over in the yard there. The interesting thing is, for the blocks, and I can think of one in particular, but I won't be able to remember the block number, is that when this particular block of HMS Prince of Wales, the second carrier, was weighed in Govan before it left to go around the north or around the south, I can't remember, to check how much weight was going on the barge, that block weighed 600 tonnes more than HMS Queen Elizabeth's equivalent block. Now, I joked at the time, and I teased the shipyard, the Aircraft Carrier Alliance, BAE, Babcock, and Thales, and teased them that it was all paint. But I don't think it was all paint, and that's my point about there is this real success. The final thing I'll say before you come off with your questions for Captain Brown is that the one thing that makes me wake up at night and scream isn't the fact that Queen Elizabeth might have been a couple of months late here and there, and Captain Pettit, who's here, and I don't quite know which month at the end of 2017 she'll go to sea in, and that doesn't matter. What industry are threatening us with is that she could be 5 months, 9 months, not late, early. And that's a very nice problem. But I can tell you, if you're the person in charge of the Fleet Air Arm, the UK's carrier programme and amphibious programme, that's quite a challenge for a Navy that's only 30,000 strong. It's a nice challenge, and it's going to be one of those ones that we twitch a bit over the next 2 or 3 years. Ladies and gentlemen, I've spoken for far too long. It was an advert. I believe it's an advert for the United Kingdom, not me, not the Royal Navy, because we're not the ones building the ships. The ships are being built in the UK, and I think it's a successful programme. And it's all about a return to big deck carrier aviation of the types of carriers that Captain Brown spoke of before, the type of carriers that he flew to. How I first became aware of him was in 2006. I was aware anyway, but where I suddenly decided I needed to meet him, I was in a bookshop in Truro. I'd just taken command of HMS Ocean, which is our landing platform helicopter, and I found this book, Wings on My Sleeve, and I picked it up and I said, oh my God, as my daughters say, this is Captain Brown, this is the Captain Brown's book. And I went off and read it from cover to cover. And of course, commanding HMS Ocean, he had a link to the previous HMS Ocean, having conducted some very sensitive trials that he can elaborate on later in the previous HMS Ocean about how you might land jets on ships and everything else. So with that, sir, I think we open it up to questions. I've probably said enough. I think get you to answer all the other questions. Ladies and gentlemen, I throw the floor open to you. And as I understand it, there are microphones around that we can use to answer the questions. Thank you.
I'd be interested to learn how you see the evolution of the major threats to United Kingdom security over the next 5 or 6 years. Where might these major threats come from, and what types may they be?
Well, the threats I think I covered largely were, of course, what is going on at the moment in these intrusions around our shores. And one of these fatal games of chess started, where we irritate each other over a period of time, and then it flares up into something that gets out of control. We don't want to get involved in any massive war again. My view would be the threat that might come from the Soviet, well, not Soviet Union, modern Russia. The first way to combat it is economic pressure. This could be enormous, and if it'll do nothing else, it will provide us with time while we have a look at what is what. But this I certainly would start that way. The most important thing at this time is to have our intelligence service at its peak. We probably have the finest intelligence service in the world, with the possible exception of the Israelis. I have great regard for them too. But that must always be at the top so that we are a jump ahead.
Sorry, can you hear at the back? Yes?
Captain Brown, you talked about the inevitability of the continued development of UAVs and drones. And what I'd be interested to know is, do you still see a role for pilots going forward? And also, from your experience from the Second World War with the first unmanned aircraft, the V1 and V2 bombs, what were your experiences from that? Thank you.
Right. At the end of World War II, I was sent on a mission to Germany to find out why they were so technologically advanced beyond us. Winston Churchill's brief was, find their supersonic wind tunnels, find their advanced jets and rocket aircraft, and find their advanced scientists. What a shopping list. But there we are, and we found them all. And one person in my interrogations, which were extensive in Germany, the one person that impressed me hugely was Werner von Braun, who, when he wasn't captured, he gave himself up to the Americans. Never in my life have I met a man with such self-confidence. When he gave himself up, he said to the Americans, "Aren't you lucky to get me? Because I'm going to take you to the moon." Now this is 1945. You can barely believe that a man's like this. There was nothing that this man wouldn't attempt to do. He told us he would like to learn to fly. It took him an hour and a half to go solo. He was that sort of guy, a genius. And you say, is that the way we're going? I would say yes. Drones certainly have tremendous potential. I have no what am I trying to say? Ethical, that's the word, thank you. Ethical problems about them. The results are what matters. You don't go into war in half measures. You go all out, otherwise you're asking for trouble. And if it produces the results, go for it.
Can I add one thing? In 2011, just after promotion, thinking I was going off to the southern part of Europe, to the Mediterranean, to Naples, to loaf or to relax for a while, I ended up as the Deputy Commander of NATO's Libya operation. And irrespective of what you think of the state of Libya now, which is part of what happens after Tripoli has fallen and the people who were oppressed took over, one of the most interesting things about the pro-Gaddafi forces, who I understand in their interviews after they were captured, was despite the fact that all I had on any one day were 2 Predator United States Air Force UAVs, all I had were 2 each day, flying at about 60 to 90 knots across the Mediterranean from Sigonella Air Base in Sicily to Tripoli, Misrata, and to Sirte. The pro-Gaddafi forces thought we had in excess of 16 to 20 permanent, 24 hours a day Predator orbits waiting to, technical term, whack them. So just in part of that, just the psychological impact of unmanned air system programs derived huge benefit for us, and we could pick the time and place about choosing at the time. And I leave quite aside the ethical arguments about that. And I think in there, as you would all agree, places like Misrata were such an obscenity in the impact on the human population that you had to do things like that and use those weapons. For the Royal Navy, we've just set up our first unmanned air squadron. Unmanned air system squadron, 700X squadron. It starts on very small basis, and at the moment it's a Boeing in situ Scan Eagle thing that flies around. And some are very critical about it, the fact that it has a camera and it's like looking through a straw. But again in Libya, we used that thing to chase the Special Forces divers who put mines in the entrance to Misrata harbour to try and stop the ships taking humanitarian aid in and people out of there. So it's a start in going down that road. I should also add that I'm a navigator, weapons systems operator, not a pilot. So there's a little bit of me that says we must have test pilots of the calibre and stature of this man in the future, but maybe the rest of the stick monkeys could move over to let us take parts. I'm sorry.
What might interest you is the American Navy has just landed a drone on a carrier, not only by day, but now by night.
I think there's another question. Yes.
I was just wondering, with regards to drones and the very fact that you are conducting warfare through a screen on the other side of the world, essentially, does it not lead to the potential for your enemies to mislead you, in that drones are very obvious in their situation in the sky, and it's very apparent when a drone is above you? Therefore, it may well lead to some kind of misinterpretation, and therefore I would question their potential to completely replace manned aircraft.
Can I answer first? The question about manned. Yes. You're absolutely right. And what I found most interesting about your question was the fact that you know, those on the ground know you're there. Until 2011, and in Libya, I personally thought that when you put your Predator, your Reaper drone way up here, you know, you can't see it and you can't hear it. And I'll tell you two stories. We became aware, as we were chasing some very, very bad people, that a part of the country, you can't hear at the back. We became aware in 2011 that as we were using some of our drones to chase some very bad people to try and bring the conflict to an early end, that actually you can, on a very quiet desert night, hear a Predator, a Reaper, a drone, or a Scan Eagle up there. But the only other thing I would say there is that there were two caveats in that campaign. You will not kill civilians, there's another way of saying it in the rules, and you will not destroy infrastructure. And the whole thing relies on the man or woman in the loop. And a jet sitting at 30,000, 40,000 feet is no different using electric-optical systems and radar to a man or woman sitting at Creech Air Force Base in the United States or at a base in this country, frankly. Yes, if you're down low in Afghanistan and you're flying over Taliban positions that are assaulting one of our army bases, then you do need to get down and low, something I've never done. But at the end of the day, whether it's someone sitting in a jet far up high or a multi-engine jet sitting looking at a screen, I would say that that's no different to sitting hundreds, tens, or thousands of miles away. Thank you.
I'm a civil airline pilot, and we've had informal briefings in the past about EMP bombs, electromagnetic pulse bombs. In your opinion, are they a real threat?
Do you know much about them?
I have to be honest and say I can remember 30 years ago when I joined the Navy feeling quite frightened as we watched these videos about Soviet attacks on ships and carrier forces at sea and everything else. And I haven't been involved in this area, you know, almost since then. My whole background is in carrier warfare and all of those things. You probably allude to the fact that I also held up an iPhone 5 at that time. And of course, our whole infrastructure, our whole way of living our lives and everything else is so utterly dependent on the internet. I can remember a number of years ago when, for some reason, I had to take down, during drug operations in the Caribbean, I had to take down the internet access to all my ship's company. And I could remember the screams, literally, from up high up in the island on the bridge in my cabin, or below the bridge, you know, as everyone in the ship suddenly realized they weren't almost talking online, straightforward conversation through the computer to that. It's not an area of my expertise. I would imagine there is still a threat there. I'm not, you know, soft-soaping you. It's not my area of expertise. But there must be a way, if you are utterly dependent on satellite systems and on communications, the internet protocols, and everything else, which is why there's this thing with the army bringing in the new brigade for cyber warfare and everything else. Whether they all need to be uniformed or with boots on is another matter. But I'm sorry, I can't answer your question. Maybe someone else in the audience might be able to answer it, but I can't. I apologize. One over here.
Thank you. I'm very privileged to be here, so thank you very much indeed for, although you didn't know I was coming, but anyway, I was very interested when you described the world as having so much water that we have to defend, and the theory of possibly 2 aircraft carriers, and you said you could have tremendous defense from an aircraft carrier, and I wasn't quite sure whether you're being facetious or not about a submarine belting along underneath it. But anyway, I noticed just very, very recently that I think an order for about, was it 13 frigates has just been given by the government. Is this what you think will be the main defence? And if so, how on earth will a frigate keep up with a carrier that can go like blazes?
I think what you're referring to was when the Prime Minister was announcing some hundreds of £1 million as the long lead items in setting up the infrastructure on the Clyde for the Type 26 frigates. The two staple types of ships we have at the moment, we have Type 45 anti-air warfare destroyers, which are designed to protect the carrier groups or the shipping groups or the convoys, but the carrier groups, the amphibious task groups, against air attack. The Type 26 frigates, which will replace the Type 23s in the next 5 to 10 years, are the ones that will continue to do the anti-submarine warfare, the gunnery for putting shells ashore, and the general purpose roles around the world. None have been ordered yet, but it's the significant long lead items and the infrastructure that's needed to build them over on the Clyde that was announced by the Prime Minister, I understand. And in answer to your question of how do they keep up, it's the same power plant in the carrier that's in, and it's not nuclear like the American ones, and our carriers don't go as fast as that. And I've witnessed them doing the same speed that Captain Brown's done. But it's the same power plant in Queen Elizabeth and Prince of Wales as in the Type 45 destroyers, and then something similar for the Type 26s, and it's all meant to be consistent so we go round together. There is only one problem though. Forever and a day, with all the technology in the world, aircraft carriers chase the wind. And while you might want to be going east, and the wind's from the west, you'll be going west. So the frigates and destroyers have got to keep up with the carrier, or the Death Star, as some of us used to call it. Behind you.
Captain Brown, in your presentation there, you mentioned the need for a home air defence force, and you mentioned the fact that that would help for possible terrorist attacks, similar to the likes of 9/11. But with increasing, in the past few years, increasing tension with neighbour states of Russia, with Russian aircraft crossing into their airspace, do you feel that 4 aircraft for the whole of the country is enough?
That is maritime air capability, not air defence as such. We're going to rely, if we have intrusions such as are going on at this moment, on typhoons. And it will have to be a fast fighter like that. I'm not suggesting for a moment that the new airstrike F-35 should take up that job. I think we still want to keep a home product like the Typhoon available for that Pacific use. The maritime capability will be, of course, a bigger aircraft, 4 engines certainly. Like we had with the Shackleton, but of course a jet, or the Nimrod as it was later on. That'll be the type that will be involved in that.
How are we doing for time, are we? One more question, or you? One more. Who won the last question?
Captain Brown. Captain Brown, can you...
Here we go, one here.
Sorry, while you get the switch, can we do the question here?
I just wanted to ask you, sir, what you saw as being the major changes in actually operating aircraft and airmanship between this, this pre-war, early war period and the end of your career?
Yes, well, now that's a very interesting question because I was invited by Lockheed Martin to go and fly the simulator of the latest F-35. And I went over there about 3 or 4 years ago, flew it, and it was very different. I wasn't flying the aircraft, it was flying me. And I was up there to push buttons. If I wanted to go a certain place, I pushed the relevant button and it went without me doing anything about it, navigation or anything else. Off it went. I began to sit and ask myself, why am I here? And I think the answer is, if any of these buttons don't work, you've got to get the airplane back to base. Find some guy who will make it work. But that is the big difference. Now, I'm not decrying what the pilot has to do these days. Believe you me, if you look at the screen ahead of you, showing you the battleground, what's going on, you have a workload that is more than sufficient for any young pilot.
I think I promised you the last question, so you better go.
Captain Brown, as you know, a large problem faced by the armed services today is manpower. How would manpower in your plan compare with the manpower we need today, and would it be achievable to staff your plan? Thank you.
Well, I think one has to realize manpower is going to be difficult. You heard me say that the voters are thinking, the parents really are thinking about, will I allow my children or encourage my children to take up a career in the armed forces? One thing that was pointed out to me tonight by this gentleman was that we're not just thinking of manpower now, we're thinking about woman power as well. And this could make a huge difference, but we have got to show that we are going to offer an attractive environment in which to work, and that the forces aren't hell-bound on fighting and destroying. They've got to be always prepared for it, but they're not hell-bound on doing it. If possible, we'd like to do it the peaceful way. But it is vital that the young get a sense, like we had in World War II, that the country is at risk for some. One surely must see it at this very moment. What's going on in Russia, what's going on in the Middle East. This is a threat to the peace of our country. And I hope that in schools this point will be pushed, that you must always be prepared to stand by your nation. And there is no finer way of doing it than joining the armed services.
Sir, I think that you've gone over the time. Thank you very much for taking the questions, unless you'd like to add anything else.
No, I think you've been very patient. I'm sure you'll all go away and think of that old codger thinks we're going to work that way. He's out of his mind. But these are purely my own thoughts on how we should do things. And some of them may be picked up by the relevant authorities, but, and I want to thank particularly Admiral Harding for what he has done in answering the questions. My hearing, as you've realized, at 96 isn't the best in the world, but he has saved the day for me, and I hope you've enjoyed the whole thing. It's been a pleasure to get back here, my old alma mater. Thank you for giving me that opportunity, and the best of luck to all of you. Thank you.
My name's Bryden Ritchie. I'm the convener of the Military Education Committee here in Edinburgh, and we as the assistant principal pointed out, put this lecture together. And it's my happy duty to offer you the vote of thanks. So can I say, Assistant Principal, Captain Brown, officers, cadets, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that a major goal of academic study is to gain perspective. In teaching students, I constantly urge them to step back, broaden their horizons, see the bigger picture. Only by taking this stance will they acquire the ability to apply their specialist knowledge effectively and wisely. I think this evening we have been able to witness a view of the future taken from a long and privileged perspective. As a cadet in Sandhurst in 1970, I was privileged to witness a lecture from that great scientist and engineer, Sir Barnes Wallis, which was also taken from a long, relevant, and well-informed perspective. It left a lasting impression on me, and I'm sure this lecture will leave a lasting impression with the young men and women who are here tonight. I'm immensely pleased in this audience to see a significant and representative cross-section of the academic, military, and civil components of Edinburgh society. I'm particularly pleased to see the rector, Pauline Walker, and staff and pupils of the Royal High School from which you graduated in 1937. From the University Air Squadron with whom you learned to fly, and from the senior service with whom you finally served. I have to thank Admiral Russ Harding for assisting with the questions. Thank you very much. And as well to the commanding officer and staff from HMS Queen Elizabeth who are here tonight and from whose decks naval aviation will no doubt leap into the next generation. Although in what exactly we shall see. So in conclusion, can I thank you for giving us a view of that future from such a unique perspective. You, sir, give the lie to the rule that there are no old and bold pilots, and I will finish with the old wafu dit. A landing is good, the Air Force will say, if the pilot gets out and just walks away. But in the Fleet Air Arm, the outlook is grim if the landing is bad and the pilot can't swim. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please join me in thanking Captain Royal Navy Eric Melrose Winkle Brown, CBE, DSC, AFC, Honorary Fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society, Discipulus Schola Regia, and graduate of this university in the usual manner, and to offer you, Captain Brown, Halsen Beinberg. Though not literally in this case.